Welcome to a discussion of commonly made errors in your first paper. This is from Mrs. Harmon's AP Lit and Composition class. All right, some of the first errors that I saw had to do with grammar. If you see a P and a V next to each other in your paper, that means you have used passive voice. And we try to avoid using passive voice. We're never going to completely eliminate it from our writing, but we really want to cut down on the instances of passive voice for a number of reasons. And for further work, on this area, you can definitely check my YouTube channel. I have a small lecture on passive voice. But briefly, you need to identify in your sentence, if I have a PV next to it, which is the subject, where's the subject, and is that really the most important subject that you want to have in the paper? Here's an example. This sentence is written in passive voice, and it goes, "The Jodes were kicked off of their land." The reason that it's passive voice is because the people doing the action, the verb is kicked, aren't anywhere in the sentence. It appears that the Jodes are supposed to be the subject, but they're not the ones completing the action. So we can change it in a couple of ways. We can first of all decide, do we want the Jodes to be our subject, or do we want the people who kicked them off their land to be our subject? Who do we want the responsibility to lie on? So we start with fixing it this way. The banks kick the Jodes off of their land. The banks are the ones responsible. We might want to highlight that in our discussion. But if we don't, if we still want the focus to be on the Jodes, then we definitely need to say something like the Jodes left their land. We could say the Jodes left their land because the banks kicked them off of it, if you want to be more precise. But we do need to get rid of any passive voice instances in that respect. If you see dang mod in your paper, that means you have a dangling or misplaced modifier. This is a little harder to explain in a short period of time, and you definitely can access some of the other websites that I have listed at the end of this lecture. The Grammar Girl website, the Owl Purdue website. But simply speaking, a misplaced modifier is when you have phrases next to each other, and one phrase is supposed to modify another, but it's not next to the phrase it's supposed to be modifying. So we have here Steinbeck uses the example of Moses' infancy in the end of his novel. And in the end of his novel is really the phrase that needs to be next to Steinbeck uses the example. And we have Moses' infancy kind of placed in there so that it implies that Moses is in the novel. We need to fix that by just shifting the structure of the sentence. So we can say, in the end of the novel, Steinbeck alludes to Moses' infancy. You also notice how we change this to a stronger verb, and a verb that actually relates to a literary device, and so we have a more precise sentence as a result. If you see TRANS in your sentence or in your paper, that means you have not used an effective transition to move us from one idea or one thought to the next. And transitions can be used, we can use them between paragraphs, but we can also use them very effectively between sentences. They help to create a nice flow in your writing. If you have a PREP in your paper, that means you are ending a sentence with a preposition, and we don't want to do that. These little hash marks here means that you did not use parallel structure when putting two or more items together in a discussion. And oftentimes what we find is that you will put together two phrases and they will be structured differently, and then we call that a non-parallel structure. So you want to make sure that your phrases make sense, that they have the same phrasal structure. And if you have some questions about that, again, you can access any of those resources, or you definitely can come and talk to me. This little circle here indicates that I will put a circle around something that doesn't look correct to me. And one of the things that I found in your paper this time around that I circled quite often was the use of the word but or the use of the word however at the beginning of your sentences. What they basically do is slow down the reader, and you're not able to really get a good run at the sentence when you have starting words like but or however, the very slow starting words. I saw some wordiness and some vague language, pretty typical for first papers, so let's just focus on some of those. One thing I want you to avoid is saying, starting a sentence with, "it is clear that," or "it is evident that," or "due to the fact that." Part of the reason that I want you to avoid that is because it, again, slows down the reader. It's a little bit like throwing marbles in my path as a reader, and I'm clumsy already. I don't need to fall down and have any more opportunities to have that happen. So you need to take out the marbles. basically from your paper, get them out of the way. Instead of saying, it is clear that, say clearly. It is evident that, clearly. Due to the fact that, instead of saying that, you can say because. Just basically cut out all that extra verbiage that doesn't, or writing and garbage that doesn't really get us anywhere. Vague pronouns can be a problem in your writing. You didn't have nearly as many as I thought you would this time, which is great. But I do want you to, I will circle almost every instance of this, that, these, those, and it. Also thing, and what you want to do is try your best to get those completely out of your writing. Even when you think it's hard and you think, oh, but I need to use this word, try to see what you can do to eliminate it. You will find that your writing will become so much stronger because of it. Another thing that really makes your writing weak are weak modifiers. You look at words like very and really and good. And one of my favorites is when students say a huge theme in the novel is, and what does that really mean? That means really, really big. Again, really and big are weak modifiers as well. So we definitely want to get rid of as many of those weak, really nondescript words as we possibly can. Another instance, and again, I didn't see it tons in your writing, but it was there, is the phrasal structure there is or there are. And that can begin at the beginning of the sentence, but sometimes it also happens in the middle of sentences. It's a little bit, again, like throwing marbles in your sentence. It slows us down. It takes the emphasis away from really what you want to be focusing on. And it begins the sentence in a slow manner. So this sentence begins, there is barely enough money. When really, what do you want to focus on? You want to focus on the scarcity of money. So instead, you can say, barely enough money exists. And there, you're taking out this slow start and you're putting the focus and the emphasis on what is important. More wordiness and vague language. Here's some quick examples. Instead of saying as the book goes on, we can cut that down to as the book continues. Instead of saying this is similar to, we can simply say similarly. Instead of saying shows the reader that, and by the way, please avoid pulling the reader into your paper and saying the reader sees, the reader sees, the reader sees. Who else would see it? It's one of the most obvious statements I find in literary analysis, and it's so very annoying. It's like fingernails on the blackboard for me. So quit telling me that the reader sees this. Who else would see it? Instead of saying shows the reader that, you can just simply say represents. With regard to support and analysis, we have a lot of layers of information we need to focus on, but first and foremost, we need to make sure that we are analyzing the piece, not summarizing it. Do not retell the story. As it turns out, I've read it quite a few times. I know what happens in it, and I don't need you to retell the story. If you relate or refer to something that happened as it relates to your analysis, that's another thing altogether. But do not summarize, do not retell the story to me. When you are providing a discussion, you need to provide supporting evidence because your theme is always going to be arguable. There's always going to be someone who's going to come along and say, I don't know that that's a theme, or can you support it stronger? And you need to be able to do that with as much evidence as possible. Don't load me up with these great big huge quotes. Find just the right amount of information within the quote and use that and use more of them. So smaller quotes and more of them is really the best way to go. If you see, speaking of quotes, a WQ or an LQ in your paper, that means you did not adequately weave the quote into your discussion, or you didn't adequately lead into the quote. You need to make sure also that your quotes work grammatically within the grammatic structure of your sentence. So here's an example of how that does work correctly. It begins, a tenant states that, so that's the setup, only a baby can start over, which represents the metaphorical impact Rosa Sharon's stillborn baby has on the family's morale. Now, I'm going to expect some further elaboration for this quote because with quotes, there always needs to be elaboration. Quotes are your tools that you use to support your analysis, but you can see that there's a nice flow and a lead in. It's weaved into the sentence and it works grammatically in the sentence. And there is some discussion about, a beginning discussion anyway, about how and why you're using that quote. Again, I said this a little bit earlier, but this is kind of a stronger way to bring it home. Use the best quote that you can find, and use not only the best quote, but just even narrow it more down to using the best part of the quote for your support. A good rule of thumb would be, if the quote doesn't directly support your analytical point, then don't use it. Don't give me a quote that just supports your summarization of the story. And I see that a lot. It doesn't do me any good. I look at it and go, so big deal. So you're supporting the fact that Rose of Sharon had a mysterious smile on her face by giving me the quote where the narrator says Rose of Sharon has a mysterious smile on her face. That didn't do me anything. That didn't move us forward. That didn't move the discussion forward in any way. Don't quote as a means of summary or retelling the story. And really, at the end of the day, if your discussion doesn't pass the so what test, then you have not created an effective analysis. If I get done reading your paper and you've done a really great job of proving to me how Rose of Sharon nursing the man at the end of the novel is metaphor, great. So what? What is it? How does it promote the bigger idea, the bigger meaning? Essentially, how does it promote and support the theme of the paper? And that's what the so what test is all about. Please consider your audience. And as we talked about at the beginning of class, the audience is me. The audience is your classmates. The audience is really other people who are concerned with literary analysis. So do not tell me and your readers that the author uses symbolism or that the author uses metaphor to lead us to a deeper meaning. Don't say authors often use metaphor to create a deeper meaning, or imagery paints a picture in the reader's mind. First of all, I know all of those things. I am an English teacher and you are an English student, and you should know those things as well. You are stating the obvious, and you are creating basically filler and wasting my time and your time by putting that into your paper. For the very same reason, don't simply look into the paper and say, hey, I spot a metaphor. There it is. It's happening. Awesome. I see it too. What I want to see is that you know how the author is using it in the piece, or you are analyzing how it supports the theme and promotes a bigger meaning. I want to know that you know how that metaphor is working in that paper, not that you simply see it. Along with don't state the obvious issues, please don't state obvious things such as telling me that the Great Depression was terrible. Got it. Most of your history teachers know that too. Most any person in the United States knows that the Great Depression was a pretty bad time. You don't need to make that statement. It's not news. It doesn't promote your analysis. Basically, if it doesn't promote your analysis, then it doesn't belong in your paper. And finally, my personal favorite fingernail on the blackboard moment in your papers is when you tell me that John Steinbeck is a skilled author, or he is an amazing writer, or he is a gifted storyteller, or he does an amazing job. I know that. That's why I gave you the book. We don't need to have that discussion. That's something that you can maybe share with your friends after you've read it. Man, this is a great book. That's awesome. It doesn't belong in analysis. What belongs in analysis is how did the pieces all fit together to prove a bigger and illustrate a bigger idea. That's what we're doing with analysis. Now, finally, if you have some information that you want to access because you've made some of these errors in your paper, if you go over here to this passive voice page, there's a hyperlink, and you can click on that, and that will bring you to my YouTube page, and that will give you my first online lecture on passive voice. If you want some other things, I haven't created anything else yet, you can go here to the Purdue OWL site. The Purdue Writing Lab is another hyperlink. It is an amazing site for all things grammar related, and pretty much any topic that you're having problems with, they'll be there to help you. Another great place is the Grammar Girl website, and there's a lot of fun videos there. I think they're called Grammar Girl Quick and Dirty Tricks. .com, so you can find all kinds of fun ways, and quick, really, honestly, of fixing some of these errors in your writing. And of course, your last resource is me, your teacher. You can come and see me anytime. You can talk to me about what you need to fix in your paper, and we definitely can have a nice chat. So, all right, take care, and we'll hope to see some improvement on your next paper.